good morning or afternoon to everyone, depending where you are. Welcome to our webinar on electric buses. My name is Jenna McDavid. I've been working in clean energy and clean transportation for more than 21 years, and the past 7 years or so, I've focused on strategy and planning to accelerate the transition to zero emissions vehicles. My focus has been on EV charging infrastructure rollout strategies and roadmaps to decarbonize transportation for fleets, regional governments, and private clients. And that's the focus of my practice here at Kimley-Hom. Kimley-Hom is one of the top planning and design consultancies in the US. We have more than 5,000 professionals in a range of disciplines across more than 100 offices. And we're proud to be named one of Fortune's 100 best places to work for the last 15 years running, one of LinkedIn's top 50 companies to grow your career, and now in the top 10 of Engineering News Record's rankings of US design firms. But that is enough about me. We are here today to talk with some experts about battery electric buses. And before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Participants will notice that they're all muted and your cameras are all off, but we still encourage your engagement and ask that you use the Q&A function to ask questions. We'll get to these after some of the initial remarks, but you can enter your questions at any time and we'll keep track of them for you. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. We will distribute a link of the recording via email after the webinar. So I think that's it for housekeeping. We will get into the good stuff. So earlier this year, a report from CalSTART suggested that the number of battery electric buses currently on order or operating in the US grew by 112% between 2018 and 2021. And we all know that those numbers are continuing to grow. In the US, the Unprecedented Infrastructure Funding Act that passed last year includes substantial allocations for the Federal Transit Administration's Low or No Emission Vehicle Grant Program and for the Buses and Bus Facilities Program that supports transit agencies with zero emissions bus procurement. Similarly, last year in Canada, the federal government announced a multi-billion-dollar investment in public transit that includes funding to support transit agencies in integrating zero emissions buses into their fleets. This increased funding is fantastic, but the transition from fossil fuel buses to electric buses is not always easy. Agencies may need to change their operations and schedules to accommodate range limitations and charging requirements, and may need to adjust maintenance schedules and operator training protocols. And despite this surge in funding, there can be some substantial financial consideration. So this is complex, but it's accomplishable, and many agencies have taken the plunge. Here at Kimley-Hom, we support our transit clients with planning to integrate electric buses into their fleets, with understanding funding availability and completing grant applications, designing the charging stations, designing the transit facilities, and then in deploying the buses. But the planning portion of this work in particular is critical. And many agencies are piloting these new technologies with small quantities of buses. And this initial experience provides a testing ground that can support later deployments at scale. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. And we'll hear from 3 experts who have first-hand experience with electric bus rollouts at their agencies, both from the policy and planning side, as well as from the implementation side. We'll hear from Ralf Nielsen, Director of Enterprise Sustainability at TransLink in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We'll hear from Chris Lubbers, the Transit Director for Summit County, Colorado, and from Steve Schupak, EV Program Manager for Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, also known as LA Metro. These gentlemen represent a range of operational conditions in their fleets, a range of fleet sizes, and very different local contexts. So I'm excited for today's discussion. Each speaker will start with a brief intro to themselves and to their agencies with a little bit of background. They'll share the motivations for electrification within their agencies and the path that they took to incorporate battery electric buses into their fleets. And then we'll share some lessons learned. And then we'll have plenty of time for conversation and discussion toward the end. So without further ado, I am absolutely delighted to introduce Ralf Nielsen from TransLink.
All right, thank you very much, Jenna. I'm Director of Enterprise Sustainability at TransLink. We are both a transit provider and transportation authority in Metro Vancouver, which is a part of the BC Lower Mainland in the province of British Columbia in Canada. I've been in the sustainability field since the early 1990s. Before I joined TransLink last year, I was with Colliers, the real estate firm, doing infrastructure and financial advisory, but then a sustainability consultant for many years before that. Before I get started, Jen, I just want to acknowledge that I'm participating in this webinar from the unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, the Stolo, the Coquitlam, the Quequt, and Similis nations, which are the First Nations in the BC Lower Mainland that our office is currently located on. So with that being said, maybe a little bit of a background in terms of our fleet. So TransLink, from the transit and transportation regulator and planning side, serves a region of about 2.5 million people. It serves 21 cities and municipalities, First Nations, and electoral areas. So it's a very broad geographic area. It has various topographies. So there's the flat lowlands of Delta and the city of Richmond, as well as Langley. And then on the North Shore Mountains, the topography is very hilly. So we've got lots of challenges with respect to various topographies. We have a fleet that is multimodal. So we have a light rail fleet, which is our SkyTrain, which was built for the World Expo in 1986. We've continued to expand that rail system. Most of it is overhead, above on a guideway, some particular tunnels in the region as well. We have 262 electric trolley buses. So we've held on to an electric trolley fleet for many, many years, and we're very grateful that we have held on to that particular fleet. We have 950 diesel buses, most of which are hybrid diesels. We have 299 compressed natural gas buses, the majority of which run on renewable natural gas. And then we have about 550 smaller community shuttles and handy darts, as well as 4 marine vessels, which serve between downtown Vancouver and North Vancouver on the North Shore. And then we have 6 heavy-duty locomotives, which run a more of a heavy-duty passenger fleet that runs out into the BC Lower Mainland, into the Fraser Valley, into downtown Vancouver, and which has 44 cars. So that's a bit of the background on TransLink's transportation and transit fleet. In terms of our pathway to electrification, it really goes to the foundations of TransLink as an organization. So we have our roots back to 1890, where the Vancouver Electric Railway and Light Company founded the establishment of an electric trolley system. And in 1948, that trolley system transitioned from a rail-based to road-based. So we retained a electric trolley fleet. So we still have the overhead catenary. It runs probably some of the busiest routes in Vancouver and the city of Burnaby. And so our pathway for electrification started from the origins of the overall organization. I would say that we're still in the early days of battery electric buses and deployment. For the last 3 years, we've been running a pilot together with the Canadian Urban Transit Innovation Center. And we are still learning what battery electric buses do, how they perform, how they fit into our overall fleet mix. We're currently running 4 on a particular route. By the end of the year, that particular route will have an additional 15 buses, so the whole route will be electrified. But I would say that, transitioning to a net zero fleet, which has really been the motivation for adopting battery electric buses, started in 2018, where the organization's board, together with the board of Metro Vancouver. So we have a joint board which relates to the governance of our organization and transportation planning and transit. They adopted very aggressive greenhouse gas reduction targets. Those targets have since been refined in December of last year. So now we're on a pathway to get to net zero by 2050, with a 45% reduction by 2030 based on 2010 levels. So our current outlook in terms of the future for the decade is really to get more than 462 battery electric buses deployed by the end of the decade. We're electrifying one of our major new transit centers. We're going to be electrifying the next major transit center by the end of the decade. We're building out and modifying another transit center to have part of their fleet running battery electric buses. We're using primarily depot charging as the solution, but we have identified specific routes that will require en route charging. But battery electric buses are not our only pathway to get to net zero. So we're a heavy investor in our natural gas fleet. By the end of 2024, we'll have 100% of that natural gas fleet being run by renewable natural gas. And so we do see the need for other types of technologies and fuels to get to our goals. In terms of our lessons learned, I would say there's probably 4 key ones, and we can get into the discussion later, Jenna, which is one is interoperability. Interoperability between the bus, the battery electric bus, and the charging stations is really, really critical. Figuring out the right technologies, the right communications protocols, the right combination between the power of the charger and the size of the battery is really, really critically important. So we've learned a lot around in our short pilot, what is the right ideal combination and how to work with the industry to make sure that the protocols and the technology work quite well together. Second of all is tech support. You know, these are heavily digitized new technologies that are hitting the road. There's digital infrastructure in the charging infrastructure as well. And so having tech support in this transition has been really, really important with our partners, both on the fleet side and the charging infrastructure side. And so that's number 2. Number 3 would be we purchased the 4 battery electric buses a few years ago. We now know that there's much newer technology out there, but we purchased them as add-ons to our existing fleet. We didn't purchase them as replacements. And what that did, though, is that at times staff were reluctant to put those extra vehicles in service. So I would say that's not one specific thing, but it's the overall change management that's required with respect to getting staff at the operational level, at the maintenance level, well educated about what's coming, and making sure that ongoing daily scheduling and operational practices are well in place before the fleet is actually deployed. And I would say the last aspect is, you know, educating our policy makers and our stakeholders and our mayor's council and their staff. There's a critical part of when we shift towards battery electric buses that, you know, there's lots of infrastructure involved, right? So infrastructure means capital projects. Capital projects mean long timelines. And that also means timelines for approvals and permits and working with our municipal stakeholders to make sure that projects actually get executed in a timely manner. So one of the things that we're working on actively right now is making sure that we can keep the project timelines as they are, despite the fact that these are new technologies that the folks that are reviewing projects at the municipal side or permits or designs are well aware of what this technology is, how it functions, where the standards are. So making sure that we have good capital project deployment to ensure that the charging infrastructure is done on time. So that's a very brief, quick overview, Jenna. I hope that fits with respect to setting the stage.
No, I think that's great. And I think there's a lot of fodder there for discussion, but I'm going to resist my urge to dive into questions for you straight away, and then instead turn the floor over to Chris Lubbers, the Transit Director for Summit County, Colorado, to share some similar information. So thanks for that, Ralf.
Outstanding. Thank you, Jenna. My name is Chris Lubbers. I've spent most of my career in the private sector resort, transit, ski resort in particular. So think of me as kind of a ski bum, which I've done most of my life. I did move into public sector in the last 10 years, small regional transit resort counties, such as Eagle County, Vail, Beaver Creek Ski Resort, Summit County, Breckenridge, Keystone Ski Resorts. Hopefully you've all had a chance to visit those resorts. Currently, I am in Summit County, taking care of their regional transportation. You know, feel free to reach out to me for anything soup to nuts. I've had my hands on grant writing, procurement, installation, bringing electric buses online, and all the operational issues that go with them. Being a very small agency, I get to have experience with all those things. Anyway, our agency does have 4 electric buses, which is quite a few. We possibly could have gotten ahead of ourselves a little bit through exuberance, but that's okay. We're learning. Our fleet is 35 buses, and we currently have 3 in operation. Sorry, I said 4 earlier. 3 in operation and 4 more on the way with accompanying chargers. Summit County is a mountainous county covering 750 square miles for our transit service area, very rural, 80,000 population. We travel longer distances, higher speeds, highway miles, and buses typically clock around 30,000 miles a year. Typical driving shift would be 18 hours for the bus, switching drivers in and out. And we're finding around 5 hours for our current model of e-buses. I say current model because there's certainly models now that will go much longer than 5 hours. Our elevation is between 8,000 feet and 9,700 feet. So way up here, which certainly does affect internal combustion engines. We find it doesn't necessarily affect e-buses at all. Colder temperatures, of course, do affect batteries, and we have cold temperatures up here and snow-covered roads. Our roads are snow-covered around, give or take 100 days per year. So we've got experience running both diesel and electric buses in those conditions. We do run snow tires year-round, which of course does affect efficiency, mileage, etc. So we do have experience with that. And we are typically parking indoors and starting buses indoors. I've got many years, decades of experience.
Chris, I think you might have hit the mute button by mistake there. We lost you. We can see you, but we can't hear you. There you go.
Okay, I think I may have lost everyone. Is that a little better?
We got you back. It wouldn't be a webinar without some sort of AV challenge. Hopefully we've just gotten it out of the way, but we can hear and see you again, Chris. Thank you.
My apologies.
No worries.
I'm kind of a backup device today, and I'm glad we got it working again so you can hear me. Okay, so we do park indoors, so starting buses is fairly easy for us, and with electric buses, we are also indoors. Our path to electrification came from the towns, resorts, and county commission through obviously a GHG reduction plan, which I'm sure all of you have. Ours was to be 100% electrified in our transit fleet by 2050. We originally planned these as replacements, the 3 electric buses that we have now. We've now contemplated them more as expansion until such time as we become comfortable with the uptime versus downtime of electric buses versus diesel buses. We are now planning diesel bus purchases interspersed with electric. So we're still heavily focused on electrification, but we've become a little bit more realistic as to how we're approaching that. Again, we currently have 3 electric buses in a 35 bus fleet, 4 more on the way through 2 grants. Depot charging, plug-in depot charging instead of overhead. That's important to us to keep it simple. So we plan on plug-in charging really for the foreseeable future. No on-route charging as well. And we've been contemplating and using a combination of 5339 low-no as well as 5311 grants for our buses. Again, our current buses have a bit more downtime than expected. We actually did recently terminate a contract for purchase with a manufacturer. However, we feel that, and by the way, I won't speak of any manufacturer names, but we do feel like the manufacturer is coming along nicely and has models in the future that we absolutely would consider and would consider them in future procurements. Over 20 months, kind of looking at lessons learned and performance of our very small electric fleet. Over 20 months, miles driven around 55,000. That's around 18,000 per bus. So each bus averaged around 917 miles per month, which is very small, not even close to what we see with diesel buses, which are, about twice that, 1,800 miles per month for us. Electric buses per charge with a 440 kilowatt hour size battery. We are using a 60 kilowatt charger. That seems to work well for us with a 5 to 6 hour charge. And we typically go around 75 miles. And again, as I mentioned, 5 hours on a charge with this size, a fairly small battery size in by today's standards bus. Our efficiency is along the lines of most electric buses, around 2 kilowatt hours per mile. Our miles per gallon equivalent is 18.9 compared to a diesel bus at around 4 miles per gallon. So we do like that efficiency. And really all we need to work on is the downtime versus uptime, which unfortunately over 20 months, 3,700 hours of downtime for the electrics compared to only 925 hours downtime for the diesels. That's a 4 times ratio of downtime. So that's what we're really focusing on. And we do have confidence not only in the existing manufacturer, but future and other manufacturers as well, that really will become, in addition to the increased efficiency, one of the saving graces of electric buses versus diesel. Our maintenance cost per mile, as you could imagine, not doing well with these particular models, 45 cents per mile compared to diesel. It's about half of that, 25 cents per mile. It's almost twice the cost, and maintenance cost only. Of course, this is not fuel, this is not consumption, this is maintenance cost only, is about twice the diesels. And as well, interoperability was mentioned. We do focus and want to have good interoperability between chargers and buses. We'll likely in our next couple procurements have multiple manufacturers trying to use the same depot plug-in chargers from the current manufacturer. What we seem to have had luck with being a small agency is when grant writing, asking for the bus and accompanying charger. So we get the chargers and the bus from the same manufacturer. You know, that can be good or bad. In a large installation, in a large charging station, you may not want to do that, but we've had some pretty good luck with that, some pretty good response from our current manufacturer as well. Chargers aren't as easy as they sound. I'm sure you've all experienced that. They fault out really just as much as the buses do. So, you know, you really need constant monitoring and maintenance of the what you would think would be very simple depot charging, including the buses. So that's where we are as a small ski resort operator in Summit County. Happy to help, and certainly reach out during this webinar, and feel free to reach out to me in the future if anyone has any questions.
Well, thanks, Chris. And the same comment to you as to Ralph. It's like there's a lot there I could dig in on, but we'll let Steve talk a little bit about his experience with electric bus deployments as EV program manager for LA Metro.
Sure, thank you. So once again, Steve Schupak. I'm a 25+ year transit and manufacturing professional. I've kind of worked my way through a number of departments at LA Metro, from IT to labor to operations, planning, etc. And LA Metro is the planner, programmer, constructor, and operator of heavy-duty transit in Los Angeles County. 4,700+ square miles of service area, 10+ million people in the county. We run a fleet of 2,200 CNG buses in 40, 45, and 60-foot configurations. We build and operate heavy rail subways. We build and operate light rail within the county. we got into zero emission. Actually, since '93, the board has really put a push on clean air operations, and they actually made a formal announcement and proclamation in 1993 that we shall operate the cleanest fleet possible. And moving from diesel, we soon got into methanol, and that proved to be a disaster. And then in the late 90s, we got into CNG, and now we're the largest CNG operator in the country. We are the third largest transit agency and the second largest bus company in the country. And we've always kind of been pushing the envelope on emissions and how to make more passengers move down the road for less energy. And so we were one of the first agencies to run a composite shell vehicle, and right now that's one of the workhorses of our fleet. We started in CNG. We got initially it was a disaster, and then we got very, very good at it. Now that's our workhorse. In 2015, we applied for a low-no grant for some electric buses with New Flyer. We got awarded that, and then shortly thereafter, we brought on some 40-footers, and those didn't work out so well. And then we got formal procurements for basically 200 buses. The first 40 are deployed on our what's called our Orange or our J line, which is a dedicated right-of-way bus rapid transit line in the San Fernando Valley going between North Hollywood and Chatsworth. It's about 18 miles from end to end, and we're running 60-foot articulated buses. We've got charging stations at 3 locations, plus we have a depot charging from that. And that was my main project for the last few years, where we got the contracts awarded. Separately, we did the construction work, and then brought in the vehicles, brought in the chargers, and lit the thing off. And between July of 2020, when the first bus was deployed on a tripper run, to March of 2021, where we had the whole system converted, that's been my #1 priority. Our path to electrification has been driven by our board of directors, who, like I said, has been focused on improving air qualities in LA County. And so we started off with our foot in the water with a few buses, and then they came to us and said, can we convert this Orange line? And we thought about it, like, yeah, I think we can, given current technologies and deep and on-route charging, or at least the promise of on-route charging. And so we went forward. They came out and said, okay, here's a directive, go do it and get that up and running by 2020, and then convert our Silver line, which is another BRT in the other valley, which is twice the distance. Get that one as soon thereafter. And while you're at it, convert the whole system to zero emission by 2030 as best you can. So that set our wheels in motion on how we're going to get there. Separately from that, the California Air Resources Board came out in, I think it was 2017 or 2018, with the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation that says all transit will be zero emission by 2040. And along the way, they've got escalating quantity minimums on percentage of new purchases that you have to make year over year have to be zero emission. They were also as foresighted to say, you get 2 choices on what technology you're going to use, either battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell. So we're somewhat bound by what the state will allow, but we're working towards that and making it work. So like I said, I got 40 buses from New Flyer that are running on the Orange line. We've racked up just under 2 million service miles with that fleet, and the other fleet of 40-footers, is coming together because it's a different service area. We have different electrical service providers, and so that's been a more technically challenging project with electrical availability and ownership of properties, etc. But that one will have another 100 vehicles. From there, it gets a little dicey. So the first two lines, we're going to be doing a combination of depot charging and on-route charging. From there, the other 2,100 buses that go on 168 other routes gets way more challenging. And so we've hired consultants to help us come up with a master plan on how to deploy, where we can go first and next. And we've kind of actually answered the big question that's been perplexing man since the dawn of time: which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, actually, the charger is the chicken, and without a charger, you're not going to get an egg. So you have to have chargers before you can get buses. And the first two procurements, we actually put it in play where we're buying the chargers from the vehicle supplier. And so we said, okay, you can deliver a bus, a month after the chargers are in place. So it's really kind of throttled them back on how and when they can build vehicles, because they love build vehicles, and that's the least of our worries. The lessons learned are actually pretty amazing when we thought about it, and where we're finding issues was not where we thought we were going to have issues. The primary one is with your utility. If you're going battery electric, and even if you're going fuel cell, you got to get fuel. So I look at either electricity or hydrogen as a fuel, or CNG or whatever. You need fuel to run the vehicles. And if you are pulling from a municipal utility, that's one thing. The first project I'm blessed to have under Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. The mayor of Los Angeles was the chairman of our board, and the mayor of Los Angeles was also head of DWP. So we had City Hall staff work as intermediaries between DWP on one end and Metro on the other, and all the other agencies within the city to push this thing forward. And it was the biggest success in the whole project was that support coming out of the mayor's office when we really needed it. And they knew who to go push on to say, go get the power and turn it on, or move this application through. And it was so successful that DWP actually formed an entire group to handle charging infrastructure moving forward, because they looked over and said, yeah, they're going to be doing more. This is not a one and done deal. We're going to be doing this on a bigger scale moving forward. So that was the first lesson. The second lesson was, when you're doing any construction, you've got your knowns, you got your unknowns, and you got your unknown unknowns, and weirdo things happen. We tried to put depot charging equipment in at our depot. Okay. Well, California, it gets hot, it gets dry, and in the summer and fall we burn, and then in the winter we flood. So first we were all scheduled up to get some switchgear or a transformer or something from DWP, and we had a fire. Okay, well, that gear was now redirected over to this housing area where they're out of power, and so now we got to order new backfill equipment. Okay, we get in line, we get that, a couple months go by, and we're waiting, and then the floods come in. So the next piece of gear that we had scheduled, well, that's now going to the flood area. So things like that, I mean, how do you plan for that? You can't. So you got to have a thick skin and be ready for unexpected. Same thing whenever you take a shovel to dirt. Who knows what you're going to come up with underground? And we had pretty good as-built for these charging areas that we own the property. We developed it. We own it. We should have as-built of every wire, conduit, and pipe in there. And we kept coming up with what I call, quote unquote, buried treasure. All of a sudden, pink irrigation lines that weren't known for bringing in reclaimed water for the landscaping. Here's an electrified conduit with low wattage power for some lights that weren't ever noted. So that's just one thing, in addition to just the normal delays with shipping and assembly of equipment and so forth. So whatever you think you're going to schedule and open on, be ready to adjust that accordingly. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may come up with.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. And thanks again, Chris and Ralph, for those good introductions. You all raised a lot of points that I'd like to circle back on, and we have a bunch of questions flowing in from the chat also. And maybe to start kind of a big picture question, and then we'll zoom in a little bit. That there was a question that came in from the Q&A about suggestions or advice for agencies that are in the really early stages of looking into electrification of their vehicles. I certainly have a perspective on that, but I'm sure all of you do too. So I'm not sure who'd like to start. Maybe I'll nominate Steve since you just finished, and then we can kind of go around the horn.
Okay, do me a favor. Can you restate that question?
Of course. So advice or suggestions for agencies that are in the very early stages of thinking about electrifying their buses.
Wow. First thing is identify your service, and by that I mean what's your core service? What's the minimum amount of service that you can handle? And one thing that we've learned is typically with depot charging, anything that's printed is going to be a ideal condition maximum that you could ever achieve, and the real service on a daily basis varies, especially out of batteries. Operator, day to day, etc. Your mileage will vary and vary substantially. One of the things we don't share with Chris out here is extreme cold. If we had to heat the buses internally without diesel heaters, which we're not allowed to use, we would be burning about 40% of our range keeping the bus warm. Yep. So the air conditioning is more efficient than heating, and so understand where you're operating, and then try to factor that in, and be ready to have a vehicle that has significantly less utility than what you're currently operating. And also, year over year, the utility of the vehicle is going to degrade. Whereas on a diesel or CNG, it's going to go 300, 350 miles from day one to day 12 years from now. So be ready for that, and start off with things that are manageable at first. 70% of our service is 150 miles or less, and so we're looking at those. We call them lines, to start off with, to start deploying vehicles, and even within those, the blocks, we're trying to achieve manageable blocks of operation. So don't plan on putting it on the all-day base run at first. Start off with baby steps.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like everyone sort of started with pilots, right, rather than just a full fleet conversion, which makes sense for a number of reasons. And Ralph, you're nodding. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think learning along the way, like Steve mentioned, embrace the ambiguity that this whole transition faces to the organization. You've got to love that ambiguity, and make sure that you've got the right people who can handle the sense of the unknown, and accept the fact that there's going to be unknown unknowns out there. You need a team to be able to handle that and drive that still forward. I would say the other thing, if they're just getting started, like, don't rule out other solutions. Electrification is one pathway to zero, like net zero, right? Or a zero emissions fleet. But often we don't really leverage, or sometimes we overlook our CNG fleet, and our stakeholders and our funders overlook it as well, right? So the potential for natural gas buses burning renewable natural gas is really significant. So don't overlook renewable fuels as another pathway to zero emissions, right? The other aspect would be that in keeping with those two themes is that the future of this transition is diverse, right? There's not a single bullet, like there's not a single solution. It's going to be multiple solutions, and we'll have to learn along the way. And I think that different propulsion, different fuel and energy sources will all have their sort of role to play to get to our objectives. So, don't overlook RNG, don't overlook hydrogen, right? for its simplicity of particular of operations. And so consider all your options and figure out where the different options are ideally placed. That's what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you, Ralph. Chris, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
Yes, as a small to medium-sized agency, I think the question was, as an early adopter, just getting started in electrification, what are some things to look for? A, take advantage of the federal funds. If you can get a bus and accompanying charger, try to do that now, especially with being a small operator. You'll likely have a facility like mine where you need to install charging one at a time, as opposed to a project that brings online a volume charging station scenario. So, get those buses and the chargers if you can through that grant money. And, although we've used the same manufacturer for our buses and chargers so far and had some pretty good response with it, I don't honestly know if that's the best way to go. So let me leave that as a question. Other than that, don't get too far ahead of yourself as we did, expecting that you'll electrify your fleet 100% within, about the same amount of time as you'd replace your diesel fleet. It's just truly not going to happen like that. So just be aware of that.
Thank you, Chris. And I think, kind of thinking along the lines of that, right, this more gradual transition rather than a wholesale swap out, I think that has some value from the perspective of resilience. And a couple of you spoke to the idea of using battery electric buses as either redundant vehicles or supplements to the fleet versus providing core service. And so there's a couple of different threads here that I'm trying to weave together, right? That's one of them, is this sort of supplemental service versus core service. I think, Steve, your situation is a little bit different from that. And then the other thread I'm thinking about here is this resilience topic. And so a lot of folks are concerned about this idea of relying exclusively on battery electric buses when there's a severe weather event. And we have good representation of severe weather events, given the representation of geographies we have here, right? So we've talked about snow. I think ice is another factor. We've certainly, I'm in Northern California as well, so had our share of concern around wildfire and then flooding. So I think there's perspectives here about resilience, there's perspectives about redundancy in the fleet. I think those things are connected. And Ralph, I know we talked about this once before and you have an interesting perspective. Do you want to start us off kind of on this general topic, and then we can let other folks chime in?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jenna. I think there's two aspects, like you said. There's the aspects of having, the service still being able to be provided, considering, say, an electricity outage, right? And we're grateful that we live in an area where, the majority of electricity generated, overwhelming majority, is through hydroelectricity, and it's been very consistent with a very small number of outages. And if those outages happen, they're usually weather related, which also have, challenges with respect to even being able to get routes served, because there are other problems having like snow on a particular route, right? So I do think that we have to look at options with respect to redundancy and resiliency, right? So having a fleet mix that has various different types of energy sources is a good resiliency strategy. But there's also this aspect is if we need backup or redundant power for charging, particularly at depots, right? To build the amount of power systems to provide that is astronomical. So the amount of, say, traditional backup generators that you would need to do that is cost prohibitive, right? So are there other innovative solutions that are out there potentially into the future that we can use, right? Possibly hydrogen plays a role in terms of providing not only the energy carrier for our a fleet, but also the energy carrier for backup power at the depot itself. Maybe there is some innovation that's possible there. So that requires really good, knowledge from the utility provider, so that you can partner to kind of solve those challenges. I think the other aspect that we're looking at is we know that the demand on the electricity grid is just going to go up and up and up, right? So, and if we are electrifying transportation generally, then what does that mean for actually the utilities to be able to provide and generate and distribute that electricity? So I think there's a role for organizations like ourselves to partner with our critical utilities so that we can help collectively solve that challenge of the demand going up while creating resiliency for our operations and eventually, to maintain transit service to our customers. So I'm sure Steve, I know they're doing work on adaptation and resiliency. So I'd be really interested to hear Steve's perspective on this.
Sure. And you hit a lot of the points right on the head. As we go from liquid fuels to gas to electric, you're really shrinking down the number of providers that you have available. If you want to think about emergency resiliency, diesel is just ideal. I mean, you can bring it in by multiple trucks. You can drive around obstacles. You can pump it with hand pumps if you need to. So that's ideal.
Yeah.
CNG, you can run with a moderately sized diesel backup generator, CNG backup generator, and compress it. Electricity, I mean, California regularly has rolling blackouts, and we have to plan and be ready for that sort of thing. And it's both cost and space impractical to try to bring in or have on site a complete redundant generating system to power the things. We are doing what we can with designing in canopies for solar with some battery backup, but is it going to give you full 24/7 operation for extended periods of time? I mean, Jenny, you're up in Northern California. You know about earthquakes. We're in the same boat where we're just waiting for the number 9 to hit and see what happens again. And as an essential service provider, we need to do as much as we can to move people during and emergency equipment and so forth during these natural disasters. But one of the limitations that we're running into is space. Between the vehicles, the charging equipment, the existing fueling equipment that's there, and we're going to keep operating for at least another 10 or 12 years, if not 20 years, up through 2035 or 40, that takes up space, and that space is at a premium. And when you think about the amount of power that we need, we're looking at 10 to 15 megawatts per location. We got 11 different depots pulling that much power. So it's cost prohibitive to try to have full redundancy, and having plans in place to say, okay, here's what we can provide, and if we get into deep yogurt, we can only do this, that, and the other thing, but not fully what we've been doing in the past. It's just not feasible given the limitations of both the infrastructure and what the vehicles will do.
Yeah, and I think, well, Chris, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? I know you spoke about sort of using the electric buses, at least in the short term, as supplemental. So I'm not sure if you're running into space constraints at the depot, where do we put these extra buses, or how you're thinking about resiliency?
No, just tagging on to both points, really the expense. We're designing a new facility, and in doing so, we brought in a transformer larger than contemplated really for any facility in the region. Just to begin, we will bring in a second transformer just as large to equate to 100% electrification at that bus storage and operations facility. So the cost up front is exorbitant. We had kind of a pie in the sky look at this facility. We had battery backup for the charging initially and found it to be very unrealistic. We really couldn't make it happen in the design process. We also looked at diesel backup generation for the charging, and the resulting diesel generator size was simply unrealistic. So just kind of tagging on to the points already said.
Okay, interesting. I think, one of the things I wanted to kind of circle back on here was this idea, again, I keep hitting this note about supplemental to the fleet versus providing core services. And I think, Steve, you've sort of transitioned the operations at LA Metro in at least on some routes to using battery electric buses to provide core service, if I understand it. And Ralf, go ahead. If you want to.
Let me clarify that, because
yes, please.
What I was attempting to say, and obviously I wasn't very clear about it, was we started off service with a short trip run, and then we've grown from that to at least on the Orange Line, they're all day full base run service that isn't compromised in any way. And you want to start off with some smaller routes and block assignments that the vehicle will achieve. So if you've got one block that's 5 hours and another block that's, we run blocks that are 27 hours long. Bus goes out one day, puts in 4 different operators along the way, and comes back the next day virtually. So it's impractical to expect a depot charge vehicle to do that kind of range. 300, 370 miles at times. So, but we have a number of runs that go off on a shorter duration, out and back twice kind of thing, and start off with those lower assignments. So it's not a supplemental vehicle, but it's picking and choosing the assignments that the vehicle is better tailored for. And as both the operators get experience and also the mechanics, and that's actually a really huge point, is getting buy-in from your labor pool to make sure that they're comfortable in operating it, they're comfortable in maintaining it, versus fear to say I can't drive it, I'm not going to touch it, and we'll do everything they can, because ranging, we talk right now the big topic is with us is telematics and getting on board real-time information. And my perspective is, you got the best battery state of charge monitor on the planet. You got an operator out there driving around saying, okay, I got 20 more miles to go this way, and I got 5%, and I got to go 30% back that way. I know I'm going to run out of fuel, and they don't want to be sitting out there, especially in the hot sun, out in someplace waiting for a tow truck or someone to come get them. So they're highly motivated to ensure that they make it back to the end of their run, so they can go home and not spend any extra time waiting around. So get them comfortable, and then continually train to make sure that they're managing their driving style to best eke out mileage out of the vehicle, because there is a huge variability. Anywhere from 2 kilowatt, mile and a half, 2 kilowatts per mile, to 5 kilowatts per mile, depending on how hard they're stomping on the accelerator and stomping on the brakes.
Yeah, let's pick up on that thread about sort of receptivity among operators and maintenance. And even, if you've heard anything from passengers or other stakeholders, I'd be curious, Ralf and Chris, what you're hearing from staff and folks who are utilizing the services.
Well, I asked my local bus driver the other day whether they were looking forward to driving a BEB, and they said, yes, I can't wait. And I think the reason was that they were looking forward to be quiet. They really wanted to be quiet. And when our customers are riding on the 4 BEBs that we have, that's one of the things that they mentioned is it's so nice, it's comfortable, it's quiet. They can have a conversation, right? The diesel in the back, that noise is gone. So I think that's one of the things that both the drivers and the customers are really looking forward for. As Steve said, you do have to spend some time on the change management side, right? This is a transition on not only on providing service, but it's also all the O&M, right, that happens at the transit centers, right? And so staff have to be really, they have to embrace the fact that these things are going to change, and they have to be looking forward to that. So you have to spend some time championing that. And if they're not, deploying the technology or servicing the technology because they consider it optional, you've got to have a champion who can work with them on an ongoing basis to help them adapt.
Yeah, I think that champion role is really important. Chris, you were going to say something.
Absolutely. It's fear-based. We were able to alleviate the fears. Drivers now like even these earlier models You know, initially they were afraid, what will the anti-lock braking system do? What will the stability control do on the icy roads? It's too much torque. How is it going to work? Truth is, it works really well. It works just fine. The control systems on even these early models are absolutely safe and working well. So now the drivers are completely integrated and sold on the change management. However, operations staff, supervisory staff, and maintenance staff, we're not there yet. You know, the buses do not have the uptime that we were looking for. So we've got some work ahead of us in the change management with those groups.
Yeah. Steve?
So yeah, so a couple of things to consider, and we've got on-route charging and being aware and training for the peculiarities of that. So we've got overhead catenaries, and so we had to develop striping on the ground and also on the curb for the driver to be able to line up. See, there's a pretty small window that the bus needs to be positioned on. Overall, I know that our passengers really enjoy the vehicles because they're quiet. They've got the new car smell. On a 60-footer, we've got twin electric drive air conditioners, so it's always blowing cold. And the operators really like the AC system. They also like the acceleration. The new Flyers have B and C drive axles, and it will pinch you back in your seats. We're actually have to start almost think about detuning the acceleration a little bit so you don't knock people off, you know, off their feet when they're standing. So the performance on them is just out of this world. So and you know, you couple that with a brand new vehicle, you know, who doesn't like getting a new car? You know, everything's shiny, everything smells good, it's all clean, it all works, and they really like it. Outside, the residents along our busway like it because you don't have this screaming fan bank going by trying to keep this CNG engine cooled, running at 1100 degrees on renewable natural gas, and you know, on the verge of catching fire just on its own operation. I mean, you know, the blankets around the muffler are just incredible to keep these things working. Yeah. So you take out that entire system, and all of a sudden, wow, it came by and went, and you can talk inside and out. It's all good.
I think that's a really good point, Steve, is about, you know, making transit attractive, because that hits the other side of what we're really trying to do, is get people, you know, out of their motor vehicles, right, and into transit. So the more the more attention we pay to how to make transit attractive and convenient, accessible, quiet, comfortable, you know, so that we can really compete with the motor vehicles. So that is really, really important. I think we have probably lots more to promote on that in the coming years and the coming decade, really, to get to really leverage what the BEBs and other alternatives can provide us in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. I've been talking with folks about sort of what is your ideal vision of the future, and I think for a lot of us, it's a future where, you know, transportation is clean and quiet, and there's a bunch of different modes available, and it's, you know, comfortable, right? So I think these are all important pieces. There's so many questions in the chat. There's so many additional questions that I could ask, but we are out of time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time today. So I want to say thank you to Ralf, Chris, and Steve for your perspectives and for your time. I want to say thank you to all of the folks who logged in today. I do see a ton of questions in the chat. We didn't get to all of them. We'll follow up via email, and I'll make sure that our presenters have those questions in case they want to reach out to any of you. We will follow this with an email that includes a link to a recording of the webinar. And as I mentioned, we'll be following up with folks who had questions. So thank you again to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Happy to be here.
Bye.